And one of the things I want to share with you as we go through this is one of the key pillars of understanding branding is that you need to look back. And more importantly, it's not that personal. It's actually about the collective. There are two key social dynamics in the world. There's the I and the we. Say I. We. There's two. That's it. There are the people in the world like the Greeks and the entire West who believe it's about I. And then you have the African and Asian bloc. You've got Japan, where there is no word for I. The word translates to I'm a portion of. You're familiar in South Africa with principles like Ubuntu, that I am because of. To separate myself from the collective is actually a problem. But what makes this conversation interesting is that if my brand is strong, that means your brand is strong. That if we're in the community together, if I thrive, you thrive. If you thrive, I thrive. So the collective is what this conversation is about. So I'm really excited to be here, to be launching this tour with NetBank across the country. There's no better place to be launching it than right here. Can I get a witness? How am I going to position my story in a way that I captivate the most valuable real estate in the world, which is the minds of your stakeholders? And there are a number of stakeholders. There are stakeholders that you may not care about. I call those low-level stakeholders. Then there are high-level stakeholders that are deeply engaged. So let's look at the difference. If you're walking through the mall and you pass someone, that's a low-level stakeholder. They don't really have much stake in your life. They just, unless you're single and they happen to be. But then there are high-level stakeholders, like your kids. I think you probably care what they think about you. It's important. Or a business partner or the bank who wants to give you 10 million rands, but they need to make sure that your ideas are unpacked, that you're thorough, that you've made and you've paid attention to details. Those are high-level stakeholders. People like to say, I don't care what people think about me. What you're really saying is, I don't care what low-level stakeholders think. But you definitely need to care about what high-level stakeholders. So high-level stakeholders is where we position in this conversation when it comes to personal branding. We're talking about how do I position my story amongst high-level stakeholders. That's it. So I created this model called personal brand intelligence. You guys know about EQ, emotional intelligence. There's IQ, your intellectual intelligence. There's SQ even, which is your spiritual intelligence. There's even CQ, which is your cultural intelligence. So I developed this model called personal brand intelligence that has a scoring mechanism. So we're going to leave here, you're going to score yourself. Can we do that? You're going to give yourself a score out of 100 before we leave. Everybody in here. Now, this personal brand intelligence involves 3 areas. One is what I call your first body, which is your values. If you're taking notes, it's your internal disposition, your values, your mindset, your conscious, your unconscious, your genetics, everything unseen. That's your internal brand, which is your first body. Okay? Your second body. The second body is your image, your physical body, your social media reputation. It is what's seen or what's experienced. And the third body, which here I have framed as NetBank. Your third body is your relationships, your connections, your associations, and so forth. It is how you connect. It is how you create connections. In fact, if you look in the brain, all information and knowledge is connections between neurons. It is, you have 1 billion neurons in the brain. You have a neuron that has my name. You have a neuron that has your colleague's name. You have neurons, and when you put them together, they fire. They create what they call a synapse, which is chemical, energy. So when you make connections in this third body, and if you were to, for example, bank with NetBank, that relationship should create energy and growth for you. So that's the sort of basic framework for the conversation. is that you have those three bodies. Now, I want to make sure that we understand the extraordinary power and the mystery of the unconscious mind. Write down for me System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the fast side of the brain. System 2 is the slower side of the brain. Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize writer, framed this conversation beautifully. Your System 1 is physically, it works so fast you can't really turn it off. System 1, your brain works fast to a point where you physically can't turn it off. The main reason why I want to show you how the brain deals with brands is because it's an important exercise for you to understand what you're up against and how you can sort of use the brain's predisposition or the brain's sort of default tendency to be able to build your brand. Again. Okay, so math problem, basic math problem. 10 plus 10. 20 plus 20. 5 times 5. 17 times 33. Now, your brain programmed those easier formulas because you come across them often. The same thing happens when you get into a relationship. You go, you plus you plus Tabiso equals something. And this formula becomes so articulate and so clear, you don't want to have to think about it. Watch this. This is so important that you get this when it comes to branding. You plus NetBank equals make things happen. When that formula happens in your brain and it settles, then you know you can trust the formula. You don't have to think about it. You walk into the bank, you know they got my back, they flexible. I know that when I walk into the bank, there's a dedicated person designed, structured for me. I know that they fit my brand. Me plus NetBank equals something. And when that question is answered clearly, you have to apply no energy or no glucose to that relationship. Things get tricky when me plus Tabiso equals I'm not too sure because they're picking up their phone. And that's when you go to System 2. System 2 is the slow side of the brain where you actually have to put in work. This is where branding becomes interesting, where branding becomes compelling, where it becomes an interesting exercise and can become a tool to help you operate at a very high level. So, 17 times 33, you actually physically have to get the calculator out. You have to put in work. If you follow this really closely, you will never approach your life the same again. A good reason why some of the most influential people in the world have gone through extreme trauma is because they have justification, because they have a good enough reason to confront their daily challenges. They look back and they go, I've gone through this, so I want to make sure that when I hit that wall, that I'm going to climb it. You will not find one highly influential person who has not made a connection with the trauma they faced. You will never find a person who moves the world who cannot reach back and make a connection with something they've gone through that gives them the fuel to go to System 2. System 2 only becomes interesting when there's enough fuel and justification. Now, there's some other influences that happen in the brain that we're not aware of that happen in our unconscious mind. So I want to go through those as well, because sometimes we face these hurdles that we're not aware of, things that impact our brand that we're not aware of. So I want to discuss a couple of those as it relates to System 1 and System 2. And this is important. If you do not engage yourself and be able to balance and anchor yourself and anchor your brand on a deep foundation, if you don't go deep inside of you You're going to find yourself making decisions you don't even know why you made it. And all of us are guilty of making decisions. You don't know why you did it. You don't know why you slipped up. You don't know why it happened. But it's because you haven't spent enough time getting to know your deeper unconscious instincts. Now, I want to just show you quickly how this model evolves. And for those of you who can't see it, I'm going to act it out. At the very bottom, if you want to make things happen at a very high level, at the very bottom, you have your values. Your values are critical. When you think about the values of NetBank, for example, when they're hiring people who align with the values, who can make things happen. Can you imagine hiring someone at NetBank who can't make things happen? They wouldn't do that. Why? Because they need people who can make things happen. And then on this side, you have what we call your environmental conditions. So let's use the value discipline, for example. Whenever I put discipline inside of a different environment, the style changes. So let's say I use the value discipline and I go to a rural area and I go up to an elderly woman and I give her a high five. I'm going to have a messed up brand. Why? Because I'm disrespectful. I'm not disciplined enough to do the research and to study what's going on in this community. If I go to do business in India and I don't understand how to exchange business cards, it happened to me when I first did my first tour in India at business schools. I just passed out the business card because that's what I knew, where it's a much deeper exchange. So it's important for you to understand that if I take discipline to India versus discipline to KwaZulu-Natal versus discipline to Lagos, that my style or my presentation has to shift. And where you get authenticity is when you understand the relationship between the three. Most people do not understand how to take their values to different environments and assimilate through a particular behavioral pattern. So whether you're on social media, wherever environment you are, your values are not changing, but how you manifest them do. Finally, as I move to a close, I want to unpack these three bodies quickly. I want to make sure you understand this clearly. If you want to make your brand happen to various higher level, the first body is the unseen. It's the skills, values, conscious, unconscious influence, your genetic influences. I've realized over the years that some things are definitely genetic, and you can contend with them and you can fight them. Like, for example, all the men in my family have a stomach, and if I don't run for 2 days, I feel it coming. I know I'm fighting my genes. If you are a guy who struggles to be loyal and you can feel that there's a player instinct in you, fight that gene. Maybe it's genetic. Maybe you need to check yourself. But the point is this: fight it. Fight those instincts, wherever it comes from, whether it's conditioning, social conditioning, whatever it is that's caused you to find yourself in a situation where you're conflicting with other people's values that you care about. Fight. So your first body is the unseen. The second body, image, style, grooming, etiquette, social media, and media. This second body is critical because it speaks to the first body. There should be a synergy between the two. It is so important that if I say I'm disciplined, I need to make sure, and ideally you want to be in an environment that aligns with your values so you don't have to compromise. If you have to make small compromises, that's fine. I was on Metro many years ago. I had a feature at the time with Paul at about 10 a.m. And a guy called in and he says, look, I've got dreadlocks. And I went to a firm and they said to me, look, we like you, we'd hire you, but you've got dreadlocks. And they didn't give me the job. He says, I went to another firm. I cut my dreadlocks and they said to me, look, we really like you, but if you were a little more interesting, if you had dreadlocks. True story. He said, so I don't know what to do. I said, how meaningful are those locks to you? Do they represent culture? Do they represent part of your faith? Do they represent something deep? Or is it just for you? Is it just a style thing? If it represents part of your faith, I recommend you don't compromise it. If it's a part of what anchors you spiritually, don't compromise it. But if it's just something small or something simple, you can compromise it just to engage and make sure your second body works on a high level. Your third body is the collective power of your networks. How much better are you if you're with the right bank? How much better are you with you with the right person, etc.? Your associations make you better. In fact, what they do is they transfer power to you. To see that irrespective of how well you do on these three key pillars, that the final one, the energy in which you do it, the energy in which you put out to the world, is a huge part of what's going to help you get to your 100 points. So I want you to give yourself 1 out of 30 for, do you understand the skill sets needed? Are you aware of what's happening with you consciously? Unconsciously, are you aware of what's happening inside of you? If you are highly aware, give yourself a 30. Same thing with your image. If you wear your tie up to here, give yourself a 2. Also, quickly, let me just mention this. Anybody with their tag still on their sleeve, deduct 10 points immediately. Please. And if you love your brother or your sister, talk to them, pull them to the side. Say, I went to this personal brand intelligence course, and I realized that you're walking around and you're killing your brand. And then check your networks. Look inside of your networks and ask yourself, how much influence and how much connection do we have together? If you want to build a brand and it's just for you, and you want to build wealth just for you, chances are it's going to be short-lived. Chances are you're going to look up one day and you're going to be really lonely, and you're going to be disconnected from the fundamental wiring of the human spirit, that we are meant to share and engage. One of the worst punishments in the world is solitary confinement. Why? Because you're not allowed to engage other people's beauty. You're not allowed to engage someone else's smile and their generosity. If you really want to build a powerful brand, serve other people at their highest level, at their highest values. Be very specific about linking your highest values to something you care deeply about to what a community or a niche market cares deeply about. Some of you have heard me speak before, and you know I've gone through a number of things. I've gone through a number of challenges, but there's nothing I've went through that I would trade for the joy to be able to look you in the eye and have a conversation with you. There is nothing I've ever gone through. Yes, I went stage where I didn't have underwear and I had to make my own underwear. True story. I literally ran out of underwear. At 13 years old, I had no underwear and physically found myself in a situation where I had to make my own underwear. So I cut up an old Batman t-shirt. And I put the Batman logo on the back. 13 years old. I went to school. I was terrified because the year previous to that, I made the basketball team at 12 years old, and everyone on the team was wearing Jordans except for me. Literally everybody on the team had Jordans. I had on some knockoff shoes from Walmart. And these shoes made a loud noise when I ran up the court. You know that cheap rubber sounding noise? So I'd already been labeled in the school as that kid who didn't really have much. I found myself in a situation where now, 1 year later at 13, my ego, and as a 13-year-old, things start mattering more. And I found myself in a situation where if somebody found out I was wearing these Batman underwear, I knew that my brand was going to be finished. So I couldn't let anybody know. So when I went to PE class the first day that I had on my Batman underwear, I ran to a corner and I took my pants off and I tried to put my shorts on really fast so no one saw my Batman underwear. But it was too late. 2 kids, one named Chad Smith and Stephen Searcy, saw them. And they made all of this noise and they brought everybody over and they said, those are the nicest underwear we've seen. True story. That day I took an order for 50 pair of underwear. Guys, it's been an extraordinary privilege being with you. And I just want to say that my dream was to always write best-selling books. That was it. I wanted to write best-selling books. And I wanted to create things. I want to share with people how to connect. And all 3 of my books have been on the bestseller list.